Thank you very much, JC. Yes, I mean, this is the third of our webinar series of 4 webinars on Fortum and Uniper. We have already finished the first 2. The first one was on the Energy Charter Treaty and the possible compensation claim of Uniper against the Netherlands. The second one was on the German coal phase-out and Datteln 4. So both of these webinars were a bit more looking backwards in terms of that they dealt with older projects or older problems of Uniper and Fortum with regards to coal. And today we want to make a little outlook. We want to look forward and check. So what are the future plans for Fortum Uniper? Because especially when asked about why Fortum bought the shares of Uniper, they often mentioned that gas was a very important asset, or the gas assets were very important for them. And today we want to have a closer look at especially the gas infrastructure projects that Uniper is putting forward, and the biggest problems connected to these infrastructure plans. I'm very happy to have Regine Richter, our colleague here from Urgewald, with us, and Constantin Zerger from German Environmental Aid, Deutsche Umwelthilfe. Both work on these gas infrastructure projects and can give you more insight on these Uniper plans. As I said, it's the third of 4 webinars. We will finish on March 4th with a webinar on the dirty coal supply chain of both Uniper and Fortum. And yeah, I will say a few more details about this 4th webinar at the end of the 2 presentations. So I would say we start right away with Constantin, then followed by Regine, and yeah, I will say some closing remarks for this session. Then we will stop the recording and you have the chance to ask whatever kind of questions you like to ask to Constantin and Regine. That's it from my side. Yeah, I would say, Constantin, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian, and thank you all for listening here. I'm Constantin. I'm working for Deutsche Umwelthilfe, or Environmental Action Germany. And maybe a few words in the beginning. Deutsche Umwelthilfe is a rather small organization, but a rather effective one, I would say. For those of you who don't know us, we have been the ones unveiling the Dieselgate scandal here in Germany, so we have a long history in fighting big industries. And yeah, but now we decided to pick up a new fight, to choose a new issue, a very important one, and that's the future of gas and the new infrastructure that's planned in Germany. We have a focus on Germany and the infrastructure planned here, but of course this has implications because Germany is in the middle of the European market and the biggest gas market in Europe. And of course, as Fortum comes in as the investor, as the company buying Uniper now here, this is going to have a lot of international implications. So I've prepared some slides and I'm trying to share them now with you. So I hope this is all working out. Give me a second here. So now it should be just fine. So the first point I would like to make is that we have to regard fossil gas as part of the problem. We didn't so in the past. Many people said, and they're still saying today, that fossil gas can be a partner for energy transition, but we have to be very clear about this. This is not the case. As we are talking about climate neutrality and zero emissions, it's quite clear that we have to get rid of all fossil fuels, and this includes gas. It might be the case that we are still depending on gas as a relatively climate-friendly source of energy for the time being or for coming years, But what's definitely out of question is to build new infrastructure for gas. Everything we are doing today, every infrastructure we are doing today should be directed to renewables and not into a fossil fuel, which has a lifespan, when we talk about the infrastructure, of 30 to 50 years, which says that it's going to extend the climate targets we have agreed on already. So any investments that are taken today into fossil gas are lost investments and are in fact the bet that climate targets are not taken seriously. So the picture is changing here. We have to think about gas in a different way. And one slide I brought is has been published by the German Federal Environmental Agency, a government research institution, and they had a look at how the gas market is going to develop in Germany. And what we're seeing here, those are the green bars. They are the important one. The light green bars is the gas demand in Germany in 3 different scenarios. One is a carbon reduction of 80% until 2050, and the other 2 is 95% reduction to 2050, and that is climate or carbon neutrality in 2050. That's the official target of our government. And what we can see here is that we are going to see a sharp decline in those green bars. And the message is that demand for fossil gas is going to decline significantly and will be close to 0 in 2050. The other bars on top of that are different alternatives. So there will still be a need for gas as an energy source, but for gas coming from renewable sources. And we have a very big uncertainty about that. We are discussing hydrogen a lot, but for sure it's not going to be any fossil source here. But the important message I wanted to bring is that it's quite clear, if we want to achieve our climate targets, then all projections show that we have to reduce gas demand. And now moving to Uniper, I think in the last webinars, it has also already become clear that that Uniper's portfolio is a pretty dirty one, in particular when it comes to coal. I think that has been discussed already, but when we look at Uniper's other portfolio, its electricity supply, then it's likewise dirty. So what we're seeing here is the installed capacity of Uniper, and that's hydropower with very limited capacities, it's nuclear power with limited capacities, and it's fossil energy. And fossil energy is by far the most important capacity for Uniper. So that's their core business. And when we further move forward in what Uniper's business consists of, then we can see here, this is again the capacity differentiated by countries and then by technologies, that gas actually accounts for more than half of the installed capacity that Uniper is governing. So gas is at the very core of Uniper. It's their main business, and that's something that really concerns us. What we hear a lot is that gas has been the reason why Fortum decided to invest into Uniper. That's probably not because of dirty coal. I think it's quite obvious that this is not a business with any future, not even in Germany, but that gas was the thing Fortum was interested in. But then again, gas is part of the problem, and as we are discussing climate change, we will also need to reduce those capacities if we want to stick to climate targets. And on the other hand, Uniper is even quite busy in investing in additional gas infrastructure. So we're discussing not only the existing portfolio, but also future investments of Uniper and investments that are still open. So here is still a decision that needs to be taken, and decisions Fortum can take a part in. What I hear a lot is that Fortum doesn't own the majority of Uniper yet. But here we are talking about the decisions that are still open, so Fortum can definitely play a role here. And what are we looking at? I have two examples here for two important infrastructure projects that also play a key role in our campaign here. One is an LNG import terminal plant on the German coast in the North Sea, the city of Wilhelmshaven. It's a quite big one. 10 billion cubic meters of gas shall be imported per year when it is installed, and that's equivalent to roughly 18 million tons of CO2 per year. And then on the other hand, we also see Uniper investing in export infrastructure on the other side of the Atlantic in Canada, Goldboro, and here we see a capacity that will be equivalent to roughly 12 million tons of additional CO2. That's highly problematic, also because we can't exclude that the terminal in Goldboro will be used to export fracking gas, also from the US. There are connections, although this terminal is located in Canada. So in fact, part of the story here is that LNG from the US, which is fracked gas, will come to Germany and Europe. And we think this is definitely something we should oppose, and an investment that should not take place. We are using those planned locations and the LNG terminal in Wilhelmshaven as like the key point of our campaign, because it's a very big infrastructure, which will be very important in the future gas supply of Germany. Wilhelmshaven alone will be responsible for 10% of German gas demand. So its capacity is equivalent to that. And just to give you a rough overview of what we are talking about, this is where the terminal will be located in Wilhelmshaven. There will be two more, or there are two more under discussion, but from different investors. One is roughly here at the River Elbe in Brunsbüttel, and the other one closer to Hamburg in Stade. And this is again something very peculiar, because we have actually three locations competing about building such a terminal. All three locations so far without an investment decision, because there's no business case, and we have our government running for new subsidies. So they just introduced new rules that will just make much easier and less costly to build such terminals. So there are even new fossil subsidies decided on here in Germany. If you look at the closer location, Wilhelmshaven is a very interesting project. We are an organization that's also looking at legal strategies. So we are very closely working with environmental lawyers, and it's kind of the core of our strategy that we also take legal steps if our arguments are not taken seriously by decision makers in politics or within the company, Uniper or Fortum. And so we are already preparing to get ready for a lawsuit if that's what's necessary here to prevent that project. And what we see here is that the terminal will be planned here in close to the shipping lane, which leads into the harbor of the city of Wilhelmshaven. And what's very special about this location is that it is surrounded by the national park, the Wadden Sea on both sides, and we also see a nature protected area just next to it when it comes to the land side of the terminal. And this is a very difficult situation. We have European safety laws that say that you can't place such a dangerous facility next to protected areas as it is planned here. So we are quite confident that this is a reason why planning authorities will not accept a terminal here in this location. And then secondly, and maybe even more importantly, we are talking about an area that will be highly affected by climate change. So the predictions are that we are going to see in this area a particular sea level rise on the one hand, and also extreme weather events will be more important. And then at the same location, we are planning a dangerous new facility, and in fact, a facility that's further going to fire climate change. So this seems to be absolutely absurd to do something like this, of course, in the first place, but in this location in particular. We also have a number of issues when it comes to the connecting pipeline, which is shown here on the map, which is about 50 kilometers long, which is the connection to the European gas network, because it's crossing through a number of difficult areas, also protected areas. So in total, this is a project that will be very difficult to realize. It's connected to high risks, and this should be another reason for investors, for Fortum as a future owner, to say no to such a project. What we did is that we published a legal opinion highlighting those points. I already took you through the main points of that legal opinion. What we are still waiting for is the formal planning procedures to start. And that's something that's very important to keep in mind, that this is not a project that has already been decided on, but it's still open. So formal planning procedures have not been started yet. So we don't have, in fact, the legal situation that a terminal can already be built, so there's no approval. And then secondly, Uniper has not taken its decision, so we can still influence that process. And something very encouraging that just happened, I've been traveling the area last week, local initiatives start to become quite active. So also the people in Wilhelmshaven have understood that this is going to be an industry with no future. Of course, in that area, which is a rather structurally weak area, people are looking for jobs and for new industry, but people understand that this is not going to have any future, and that the jobs that will come along with such a terminal, which will be a limited number anyway, will not be sustainable in any kind of way. So local opposition there is forming. A new initiative was just founded, and we had a very successful event there on the ground. So my hope is that we can move this to an international level as well, because the consequences of the infrastructure we are discussing here will be globally, they will fire global warming. So we hope that we can gain further support in our opposition in those projects to stop new LNG terminals here on the coast, to turn the direction around when it comes to gas, to prepare a gas phase out, and then, of course, to stop Uniper investing in such an backwardish infrastructure. And that's it. Thank you very much for the time being.
Thank you, Constantin, for this presentation. As we've said, we would like to answer your questions at the end of all presentations. Nevertheless, you can already use the chat box and write down questions if you have some. So now you got a first impression about one of the projects, but unfortunately it's not the only critical point. And so I'll hand over to Regine, who will present to you Uniper's idea of the energy transition as such.
Thank you. JC, muss mich wieder mal so freischalten, weil meine Stummschaltung ausschalten. Okay, sorry, we had a small issue here. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So thank you, Constantin. And just very quickly, my name is Regine. I work together with Sebastian at Urgewald, and I look into energy issues. And ja, ich kann das hier nicht anmachen. Das müsstest gegebenenfalls auch du machen. Sorry, we continue to have technical issues. And one of the things I have been working on is gas as part of the problem, and that's how we sort of stumbled over Uniper. And if we look into Uniper's idea of the energy transition, I can't do anything here. JC, ich kann auch nicht. Oh no, it seems to work. Sorry. So Uniper's idea of the energy transition seems to be really just switch from coal to gas. As you can see on the slide, I'm the queen of PowerPoint presentations, bear with me, I'm sorry. But this is basically showing that they are going into gas. And yeah, okay, so now that seems to work, but still, I don't know whether I can, yeah. So if you look into more really the numbers, what you can see is while the generation and electricity sales go down over the past 3 years, the gas sales from Uniper go up. I mean, those are the numbers from their half-year financial report. And you can see that this is really an area where they continue to grow, basically. So Uniper really clearly banks on gas, on an intensive gas future. And Constantin, I'm going to repeat a couple of things which Constantin has said, but bear with us, and repetition helps you to keep it in mind. If you look into how often the coal to gas switch is being discussed, it is promoted as a climate solution because burning gas produces less CO2. And then the argumentation is, look, if you go for gas instead of coal, this is better for the climate. But as Constantin said, gas is a fossil fuel as well. It is producing CO2 when you burn it. So it is part of the problem. And reacting to the criticism of environmental NGOs, there have been basically two answers. One is that gas is a bridge that we need to a renewable future. And then the second point is that at some point, all gas will be green gas. You know, you use the surplus renewable energy to produce hydrogen, and that can then be used as a sort of a green gas. And on the two arguments, for one, all climate scientists basically say the gas bridge needs to be much smaller and much shorter than even a couple of years back was thought. So if you look into this graph, it's basically showing the need for gas the use of gas needs to go down rather quickly. So this bridge is a really very, very short bridge. And the other argument that all gas will be green, there might be a point that you get some renewable gas in the future, but we're talking about much smaller amounts, and we have to make very clear choices about what do we need the small amounts of renewable gas for. And if you really look into if you look into the use of renewable gas, it's a question, why do you need long pipelines or LNG terminals to produce or to transport renewable gas? So if you look into really the projects that Uniper is looking into or Uniper is promoting and participating in, it's a lot of fossil fuel business just as usual. And if you look into how they present themselves, it's the same thing. And they say we are well positioned along the gas value chain. And the one thing that you can't criticize Uniper for is that they would put all their eggs into just one basket, because they really look into diversification and that sort of security of supply, because they deal with Russia, Azerbaijan, the US, Canada, and Australia as sources of the gas. And they do participate in pipelines. I'm going to talk about this in a minute. The Southern Gas Corridor is one. Nord Stream 2 is another one. And they are increasing their LNG portfolio. And Constantin was touching upon the Goldboro Canada case. I mean, he said it is an LNG terminal, export terminal, that is supposed to be built at the east coast of Canada. The idea of Piredi Energy, which is the project promoter, is to build an LNG terminal on the East Coast to ship LNG to Europe, because they hope the transport way is so much shorter, the route is so much shorter, that this might result in lower costs. And Piredi Energy, the project promoter, did secure a 20-year supply agreement with Uniper for half the LNG produced in Goldboro. And what you have to see is that Piredi is really struggling to get together the financing to realize Goldboro. In December 2019, they were renegotiating the agreement, and they looked into, we do have difficulties, or I mean, they don't say we do have difficulties, but they say it takes a bit longer. And what they basically said is, we remain committed for a final investment decision in 2020, which is, from a climate point of view, basically potentially good news, because it says it hasn't been decided yet, as Constantin was pointing at. But this shows as well that there is a very direct responsibility of Uniper, because of this long-term deal, whether or not this project is going to be realized. And then just quickly, another LNG project is happening in Australia, and that was reported by the end of December last year. That was Uniper and Woodside Petroleum did sign an agreement for a 13-year LNG supply. And the one important point about this is the idea is that they get some LNG by now, and that the amount of LNG might increase, and that this would mean that there is, again, an investment decision to expand the production in the existing LNG plant that is there in Western Australia. So this is really about, we do this contract, and it leads to an investment decision, and it leads potentially to expansion of gas infrastructure, which is really bad news in a climate restricted world. And if we look not only in the LNG, but in pipelines, Nord Stream 2 is a pipeline that is supposed to bring Russian gas to Germany, bypassing transit countries such as the Ukraine. It is a very contested pipeline. Probably everyone has heard about the recent US sanctions against companies that are helping to build this pipeline. It has been very contested by Baltic countries and Poland due to the increasing influence of Russia as exporter and decreasing importance of transit countries like Ukraine and the effect this might have on Ukraine. It would add 55 billion cubic meters of gas to the German market. And Nord Stream 2 will be built by Nord Stream 2 AG. That was founded to plan, build and operate the pipeline. It is based in Switzerland. And its shares are being held by Gazprom. This NS2, Nord Stream 2 AG, has signed financial agreements for the project with financial investors, and among them is Uniper. Uniper together with Wintershall, OMV, ENGIE and Shell. And one other pipeline I wanted to mention is the Southern Gas Corridor, which is a pipeline that will bring gas from Azerbaijan via Georgia, Turkey, Greece, Albania to Italy. The pipeline has been criticized for stabilizing the Azeri regime, which is basically the Aliyev family, which has been jailing critics, obstructing the work of NGOs, and not allowing political opposition to work. There have been recently elections which have been criticized as being quite flawed. SOCAR, which is the Azeri state-owned oil and gas company, is involved in all parts of the pipeline. And in Italy, where the pipeline is going to end, or to land, it is very much contested because the region where this will arrive is very much dependent on tourism and olive tree agriculture, and both areas are thought to be threatened by the pipeline. In Italy, recently, the courts are looking into the pipeline because of problems with the environmental impact assessment. They are going to start court hearings in May. So it hasn't been finished totally, and it's still being very much opposed in Italy. And in this case, Uniper's involvement is via a contract for 1 billion cubic meters per year that they are going to buy out of 10 billion cubic meters that the pipeline is supposed to transport in the beginning. And here again, the contract was at the basis of the investment going forward. And all these projects are adding new infrastructure in or to Europe, or with Europe as a destination. And that's in contrast to declining demand projected in Europe. You can see here a graph that is basically E3G, an environmental climate think tank, did put together. They were comparing projections for the EU, and they are all going down very much. The same picture is being shown in another graph, which is basically showing that the demand is going down, but the infrastructure that is being planned is still at the same level and potentially even increased if you count projects of common interest to it. And that basically means that you have an abundance of infrastructure which risks of becoming stranded assets, or as we discuss it here, to be the basis of the next investor to state claims. And if you look into the new infrastructure, one thing is that this is really potentially all stranded assets. But another point is obviously that new infrastructure wants to be fed with new gas and draws to the exploration and exploitation of new gas fields and sources. And if you look into the climate restricted world that we live in, Friends of the Earth Europe did commission a study to look into the role of gas in the climate restricted world. And the authors concluded very clearly that there is categorically no role for bringing additional fossil fuel reserves into, including gas, into production. So that message is very, very clear from a climate perspective. So in conclusion, in the light of climate emergency, gas being part of the problem, declining demand, if you look into the scenarios, being involved in building quite a few new gas infrastructure doesn't seem to be a very wise business decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Regine. Yeah, it is not a really wise decision. I completely agree. So I would quickly sum it up with the last presentation. A very, very short one, and some of you know some of the details already, but I hope that we also have some new guests here in our webinar series, so I will repeat a few topics because it's the overall question: what's the connection between Fortum, the Finnish government, and Uniper? As I said, also in the last webinars, E.ON is the company that decided in 2016 to split off the fossil assets and also the hydropower plants, to be fair to add this, but all the fossil assets, so the gas plants and the coal plants, and also all these infrastructure ideas. And they created a new company called Uniper, Unique Performance. This is what they said was the idea for the name. They kept at the beginning 46.65% of the shares of Uniper, but in 2018 they finally sold the shares. It was their decision from the very beginning to do so, so they never had the idea to keep these shares, but in 2018 they sold them and they found a buyer, which was the Finnish state-owned company Fortum. I know that we've been criticized last week when we were in Helsinki to call Fortum a state-owned company, but if you own more than 50% of Fortum, then I guess the Finnish government should be aware that they are somehow in the driving seat. In the meantime, Fortum has announced that they want to increase their ownership from 49.99%, that was it at the end of 2018, to more than 70%. We expect this decision, this transaction, to be finalized at the end of the first quarter of 2020. Who knows, maybe there are some delays because it also depends on the changes in the Russian government, because the Russian authorities, due to the assets that those companies also have in Russia, the Russian authorities have to decide on this, but I guess in the end it's quite likely that this will be approved. Therefore, it's also hard to understand why Fortum frequently repeats the argument that they have no decisive power here, because if you own the half of a company, it would be the only case that I know in this world where you cannot influence a company's decisions. We have made campaigns in the past towards investors who had like 10 or even less % of an energy company, and they were able to really influence the utility in the end. So I think that Fortum should rethink the argument that 49.99% is not enough to influence Uniper. And if the takeover of additional 20 or more than 20% of the shares is completed, I think this is no longer a valid argument anymore. And as Constantin and Regine have stated, when we look at the past, of course, Fortum could not decide on the initial decision to build Datteln 4 or Maasvlakte, the power plants that we have spoken about in the last webinars, but they can, of course, influence these future decisions because they will affect their core business at that stage. Today there was the visit of the Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin to Berlin, and there have been protests in Berlin as well, because Fortum is owned, more than 50% of Fortum are owned by the Finnish government, especially the Prime Minister's office. And of course, the argument that they do not want to interfere into the day-to-day business of the energy company, this is what we can somehow understand this argument. But if a government has decided, and I mean both the German and the Finnish government have decided to ratify the Paris Agreement and to say, okay, we will fight for 1.5 degrees, then this should be reflected also in the state ownership steering of the state-owned companies or of the companies where they have a strategic interest. Fortum is one of the companies which is of strategic interest for the Finnish government. I will leave it here and leave room for questions, but I would like to finish this part of the presentations with the outlook. In 2 weeks, we'll continue with Fortum's and Uniper's dirty coal supply chain, the 4th webinar of our series. You can find the information about that webinar and also the recordings of the previous webinars on urgewald.org/webinars. We will start, like always, on a Wednesday at 4 p.m. Central European Time, 5 p.m. Finnish time. And yeah, now I would say thank you so much for this first part, to listening to us. And now we will switch off the recording and leave room for questions. Thank you very much.